Oh, I love this section. It's called Defending the First Series, where we expose the enemies of the First Amendment, free expression, and free thought. The latest target of campus censorship and the epidemic there is renowned history professor emeritus Bert Folsom of Hillsdale College. An approval committee at Davidson College in North Carolina tried to ban him from delivering a lecture on campus. The committee's excuse? Well, they claim the lecture would not be academic enough. Let's bring in Spencer Brown. He's the spokesman for the group that invited the professor to speak, Young Americans for Freedom. We have other stories to get to as well. They ultimately, Spencer, allowed him to speak on campus, but not at that particular venue, which is bigger, and they put him off to the side somewhere, and they said, well, you can speak over here, the unwashed professor. What's going on? Yeah, that's exactly right, and I don't think it's any secret to you or your viewers that there's a real crisis in ideological diversity on college campuses. But what surprises us continually is the excuses that liberal administrators use in order to shut these speakers down. So here we have Davidson College telling us that Bert Folsom, who's at one point had the #1 best-selling history book in the country, is not academic enough to speak on the main part of their campus. It's just ridiculous. Well, it's a fraud. And there's another hilarious story. Campus Reform went out and they decided to interview students about sending troops to the border and immigration and so forth. Let's watch.
When President Obama did it, I felt that there was, I suppose, different coverage as to what the intentions were.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
On who can be here or not, basically.
Yeah.
At a border, I think most people would say.
Yeah, well, the students didn't know that President Obama had actually sent troops to the border. And so they're like, well, when he did it, what is your take on the lack of just basic understanding of whether it's the Constitution or just basic recent American history? It is a constant demonization of Trump or the propaganda machine on college campuses for like 50 grand a year, a lot of these places. Yeah, well, that's the real tragic part, is these are students who are going to school allegedly to get an education, become well-rounded, and instead they're not learning critical thinking skills, they're not learning how to defend their ideas, they're just being fed this pablum of leftist ideology. And so what you see here is these students who don't know why they may support or oppose this policy. All they know is if Trump supports it, it must be bad. Whereas if you had asked it the other way around, if Obama had supported it, you know, they'd say it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, so that was at UC Santa Barbara. And so, but what you didn't show in this video is before, they didn't know that Obama sent the troops to the border. So they kind of like had to back into that. Oh, well, when he did it, it was necessary. It's just, I mean, it's classic. This is classic, uninformed, God bless them, uninformed college students who learn it for the first time from some radical professor, radical history professor. Then at GW University, right nearby where we are, the Democrats, some of the college Democrats are not participating in some type of bipartisan discussion summit last week. They don't even want to be bipartisan. Well, it looks like basically the leftists are showing their true colors, and that is they don't want a dialogue. They don't want the free and open exchange of ideas, because they know when that happens, the best ideas rise to the top and the flawed ideas, the left's ideas, will fall off. And so what you see here is basically their goal is to allow a situation only where leftist ideas are heard, because they know when conservative policies and solutions are offered, those are going to be the ones that students pick. Right. They don't have a choice. They're petrified of a debate. I've never seen anything like it. They are the pusillanimous, they're petrified. And they, by the way, they said some members of the current executive board have hesitations about participating in events with conservative orgs. They're scared. Petrified. Balk. That's all I'll say. Spencer, great to see you. Thanks for the update. We'll be right back. So we want to send our prayers and our best wishes for President George H.W. Bush, who's recovering tonight in a hospital. He was in the intensive care unit with a blood infection, just, of course, a few days after burying his beloved wife, Barbara Bush, the entire Bush family. We wish you and him all the very best. Very difficult time. And a quick reminder, tweet me at Ingram Angle. We always want to hear from you about tonight's show, what you want to see on tomorrow night's show. That's all the time we have tonight. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team have a phenomenal show on tap. Shannon.
Laura, thank you very much. Welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Coming up, President Trump's controversial pick for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo narrowly clears a Senate committee vote and heads for a full Senate vote. So will he be confirmed? Senator Mike Rounds weighs in. Plus, a terminally ill baby has been taken off life support. Protesters storming the British hospital in dismay. Can the Pope help now? Well, former Governor Mike Huckabee is here on that. But first, this is a Fox News alert. Toronto police say a 10th person has died after a man driving a rented van plowed into pedestrians in an incident disturbingly reminiscent of several ISIS-inspired terror attacks, including one last November at New York's Chelsea Piers. But we still don't know what motivated this suspect, a Canadian man named Alex Minassian, to allegedly jump the curb, then mow down innocent bystanders on Toronto's popular Yonge Street. That's where Molly Line is right now with more on the investigation. Good evening, Molly.
Good evening, Shannon. We're standing right at the corner where this horrific attack began. The police have the area shut down, the area secured. They're expected to be here for several days, combing over what is a pretty extensive physical crime scene that lasts for several blocks. As you mentioned, there's no word yet on a motive in this attack following the horrific attack of using a large white rental van to literally mow down pedestrians in one of the busiest streets in this city. The suspect has been identified as Alex Minassian, 25 years old, from a nearby Toronto suburb of Richmond Hill. 10 lives were claimed, 16 people injured. The brutal force of this large van leaving some dead at the scene, others fighting for their lives as they were rushed to nearby hospitals for care of severe wounds. Frantic calls for help started coming in around 1:30 this afternoon as witnesses reported that vehicle jumping the sidewalk at a busy intersection, mowing down people with seemingly deliberate speed, traveling for more than a mile.
He just went on the sidewalk. He just started hitting everybody, man. He hit every single person on the sidewalk. Anybody in his way he would hit. The bus stop, everything got shattered. There was a lady in there that I saw. I just stopped and I looked and I went after it again. All I see is just crumbling up one by one, one by one. Holy God, I've never seen a scene like this in my life, I swear.
The van, with extensive front end damage and bearing a logo for Ryder Truck Rentals, finally stopped on Points Avenue, where video captured at the scene showed the driver waving his hands with an object at a police officer. Soon that item was dropped and the man obeyed orders to get down on the ground. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted, "Tonight, the hearts and thoughts of an entire country are with the families and friends of those killed in Toronto today. We also wish all those injured a fast and full recovery." He went on to tweet, "The Toronto police and first responders face danger without hesitation today, and I want to thank them for their courage and professionalism. We'll continue working with our law enforcement partners as the investigation continues." America's leaders have expressed solidarity. Vice President Mike Pence tweeted, "POTUS and I are closely monitoring the attack on innocent people in Toronto this afternoon. We are with the Canadian people tonight as they grieve the loss of life and injured. The American people stand shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors in Canada." Canadian authorities say it's too soon at this point in time to say whether terrorism played a role, but Ralph Goodale, the Minister of Public Safety, said that there is no known national security link from the information they have thus far as this investigation unfolds. Investigators are taking an all-hands-on-deck approach to this. Municipal, provincial, and also federal authorities are all working together. Shannon?
All right, Molly Line for us live on the scene. Thank you very much. Nashville police say they have arrested a suspect accused of killing 4 people and injuring several others with an AR-15 at a Waffle House early Sunday morning. 29-year-old Travis Ranking was taken into custody today, ending a massive manhunt. Ranking had been on law enforcement radar. The U.S. Secret Service had contacted local police after Ranking was arrested last July for refusing to leave a restricted area near the White House. Police in Colorado also say he complained to them in 2017 that pop star Taylor Swift was stalking him. He had lost his Illinois firearms license after exhibiting erratic behavior. His father reportedly was given the guns and then returned the weapons to his son. Well, there's still no publicly known motives yet in Toronto or Nashville. Let's bring in former CIA analyst at NYPD Intelligence Division leader Buck Sexton. Great to have you with us tonight, Buck.
Good to see you, Shannon.
All right, 2 very different cases. At this point, there's still a lot of detective work to be done on what drove these 2 men, but a lot of people are raising questions about whether it's mental illness, whether these are copycats, whether they're motivated by anything beyond that.
In the case of the Toronto attack, it certainly bears all the hallmarks of what you'd expect from an ISIS-inspired attack, although we haven't seen any chatter yet from ISIS channels saying that they are claiming this individual as one of their own, which they often do, although there's sometimes a time lag. And people have noted that they don't see anything right now about motive. And until we get a sense of this attacker's social media background, what he was into, what he was up to, it's very tough to tell. It is worth noting that someone's name, someone's background, wherever he may be from or his family may be from around the whole world, it doesn't really matter. He could be ISIS inspired. It's an ideology. It's not about what he looks like or where he may come from. So we just simply don't know enough beyond that, other than looks like a terrorist attack. And then in the case of this Waffle House shooter, here you have somebody who's obviously deranged, and the questions that I think a lot of people are asking right now revolve around, well, we knew this, law enforcement knew this, they took firearms away from him. Why the firearms would then be given to a family member is a question that I know a lot are going to be posing. And also, was there something that could have been done on the side of mental health here to perhaps institutionalize this individual? It certainly seems like he needed a whole lot more mental health attention than he got leading up to this incident. He was on law enforcement's radar, and it feels like the system failed here once again. Fortunately, a citizen, an everyday citizen, stood up and was a hero and saved some lives, but it doesn't feel like law enforcement in this case acted with enough proficiency to get it done.
When we look back to what's happening in Toronto, and the police chief there has said, we're looking at everything, the motivation, we're looking at all the things you mentioned. Of course, you would go into an investigation, social media, and those kinds of things. Apparently, what they're saying thus far is the police weren't familiar with him. This is not somebody who had a long record or a lot of interaction with them. If it turns out he's mentally ill, or if he was motivated by something linked to terrorism, do terrorist groups even care? I mean, they are looking for people who are unstable in some way anyway. So whether this person is pledging allegiance to them or not, if they're somehow inspired by the attention that somebody gets for carrying out one of these vehicle attacks, it seems like an easy way to get a lot of notoriety.
Well, there are certainly plenty of psychopaths and sociopaths, deranged individuals who have been very active members of terrorist groups, stretching back as long as we've been paying attention to these things. So it's not as though you can't have dangerous mental illness coinciding along with somebody also adopting an ideology that would push them to engage in terrorism. It's happened plenty of times. And I think if you do a psych profile on a lot of members of the Islamic State, for example, it takes a very particular kind of person to engage in beheadings on video. So these are not things that we should think of as necessarily being separate. That said, with Toronto, we simply don't have much more in the way of data to suggest that we are at a motive. I mean, we know it's terrorism. It certainly looks ISIS-inspired based on all the markers for this kind of attack, based on what we would look for in terms of the target set here, essentially random and as many casualties as possible using a van. But when you look at this Waffle House shooter, you're talking about somebody who just seems like is completely deranged and should have been averted somehow. This could have been averted if you had just had more concerted effort from those around him. I mean, I think the biggest lapse leading up to the event seems to be from the father, although I'd want to know how and why. I believe it was a sheriff's department in Illinois, on behalf of the FBI, took the weapons away. Why did the weapons get back into the hands of the father? What was the regulation there? That seems like very poor judgment. Yeah,
and if the licensing was stripped in Illinois, it may not have prevented him from having ownership in Tennessee. A lot of questions as states handle these individually from state to state, different approaches. Buck Sexton, thank you for weighing in. Good to see you tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Well, President Trump getting a commitment from France to beef up its spending on NATO. Now, a tougher conversation, agreement on what to do about the Iran nuclear deal. White House correspondent Kevin Corke joining us live with the very latest on the state visit by the French president kicking off today. Big events tomorrow. Kevin?
Looking forward to all the action tomorrow night. Of course, it is a Trump White House first, Shannon, a state dinner. That one coming up later on. And, of course, we'll bring you all the coverage tomorrow night. But tonight, a chance for a little exchange over at the original home of our nation's very first president. That's right, a trip down to Mount Vernon of George Washington fame. Of course, this is ahead of a week of international diplomacy and major decisions, both by the French and the Americans. By the way, this is a 3-day visit by the French president, sort of a home-and-home engagement, if you will. And it follows, you may remember, the president's trip to Paris about 9 months ago. Now, upon his arrival today at Joint Base Andrews, Emmanuel Macron actually spelled out in no uncertain terms the magnitude of tonight's trip.
This state visit is very important for our people and very important for us.
Indeed, important for the French people. Now, unlike the president's visit to Paris, Shannon, this time the two men will discuss a host of pressing issues that frankly threaten to divide the longtime allies, and most notably the Iran nuclear deal, the conflict in Syria, what to do about North Korea's nuclear ambitions, transatlantic trade and tariffs, even the environment.
We have an incredibly good negotiator at the table for the United States, but what you do have are two leaders who have a great deal of respect for one another, who have a great friendship, certainly both have a great deal of interest in doing what is best for their country.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders there. Now, there is little doubt that next to trade, the Iran nuclear deal will obviously garner the most attention. The president, Shannon, is looking for deliverables to keep the U.S. in that six-nation accord. Or, as you've heard us report all day long, he may pull the U.S. out of the deal sometime in May. And while President Macron is pushing to keep the alliance together, the Iranian foreign minister is now threatening that his nation will restart its nuclear program if the U.S. decides to abandon the pact. Well, as you can imagine, the White House is saying, listen, we are willing to walk away if necessary.
We certainly think that there should be a better deal, one that actually is positive, that works, and we don't really typically look to the leadership in Iran to determine what our foreign policy is.
Tough words there by the press secretary. Of course, this is all part of a very impressive and important week of diplomacy here at the White House. Yes, we're going to be talking about Emmanuel Macron being here, but don't forget the German Chancellor Angela Merkel will be here later in the week. Again, trying to once again encourage the president to somehow, some way keep the U.S. in the Iran nuclear deal. Of course, all the reporting for you right here, including the state dinner. But for now, back to you.
It's going to be fancy. And so are you, Kevin, so it's going to be perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Senate lawmakers reportedly postponing the confirmation hearing for Dr. Ronnie Jackson, the White House physician nominated to run the Department of Veterans Affairs. According to the Washington Post, there are bipartisan concerns about Dr. Jackson's oversight of the White House medical staff, as well as his qualifications to run something like that huge agency. Dr. Jackson's confirmation hearing still showing up on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee online schedule for this Wednesday. Well, President Trump's choice to become Secretary of State barely clearing the Senate Foreign Relations Committee along party lines. The White House claims Democrats are dragging out the process.
Look, at some point, Democrats have to decide whether they love this country more than they hate this president. And they have to decide that they want to put the safety and the security and the diplomacy of our country ahead of their own political games.
Democrats like Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, and Joe Manchin all facing intense pressure from their base not to work with Republicans, despite their public pledges for now to vote for Pompeo on the Senate floor. Well, Senator Mike Rounds, the Republican who sits on the Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee as well, joins us live. Let's start there, Senator. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity.
What can you tell us about the holdup with Dr. Jackson's nomination to head up the VA?
Chairman Isaacson had a phone conversation with a lot of us around the committee over the weekend, indicated that there had been some unsubstantiated allegations made, and he wants to do it right. We told him that if he wanted to delay the meeting, that was fine with us. We most certainly want to get all the facts out. We have to do our due diligence. Personally, I had a meeting in my office with the Admiral. He presents himself very well. But at the same time, as members of the committee, we've got to do our due diligence, and that's what we'll be doing.
And this has been such a fraught agency and department with plenty of bipartisan agreement that there have to be better answers for our veterans.
No question about it. Look, this is 360,000 individuals, and the question is, are they going to run the secretary, or is the secretary going to run them? And in this particular case, we want to make sure we've got the right person for the job. And this should be focused on what the veterans need. And this is what we want to do is get focused back on what our veterans need, what their care conditions are, and so forth, and get it away from the VA and back focusing on what the VA should be doing, which is taking care of our veterans.
That's what we owe them, absolutely. We can all agree on that. Okay, so let's talk about another important nomination. CIA Director Mike Pompeo making it through barely the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they worked out a little deal because Senator Isaacson was missing earlier. They could have waited until about now to vote on him, but they worked out a deal so that he passes on to the Senate. But there's still a number of critics. Senator Tim Kaine saying this, and he voted for him as CIA Director just a few months ago, but now saying, just like I don't want to vote for anti-science people to be the head of science agencies or anti-education people to be head of education agencies, I don't want to vote for people who are anti-diplomatic, and that seems to be how he's characterizing the director.
Well, with all due respect, I think Mike Pompeo was the right guy for the job. You know, when he had his nomination and his vote when he was going to become the CIA director, we had 66 votes in favor. That was 14 Democrats that thought that he was capable of being the director of the CIA. Look, he was first in his class at West Point. This is a guy that's been, this is a guy he thinks things through very, very well. He has the president's ear, and he understands the direction that the president wants to go. Mike Pompeo was the right guy for this job.
Well, we'll see as it moves on now to the full Senate. In the meantime, one of the things he's going to have to deal with is this conversation with the president about this upcoming deadline on the Iran nuclear deal. The French president is here. It's something they're going to talk about. The French want us, obviously, to stay as part of that deal. Here's what the French President Macron said to our own Chris Wallace about this.
Is this agreement perfect, and is JCPOA a perfect thing for our relationship with Iran? No. But for nuclear, what do you have as a better option? I don't see it.
And he's saying basically you should stay in the agreement, try to modify it, and not walk away from it because there isn't a better backup plan. What do you think?
Well, the other side of it is we've given up most of ours already. And so in this particular case, there's not a lot we can do. What he's talking about here, really, there's a lot of truth in it. And so we can talk about getting out of it, but what do we have to gain at this stage of the game? We've already delivered the funds. They've already been using the funds that were there. This was not a good deal in the first place. The president is absolutely correct. It was a bad deal, but it's a deal that's been made, and we've delivered a lot of resources to them already.
So worse to walk away or worse to stay?
Well, right now, what do we have to lose at this stage of the game? Because they have to, if they're going to honor the agreement today, then fine. If they're not, what do we have to lose? Because we've already delivered to them. We've already made promises to them that we've delivered on. Cash is in their hands. This was a case in which we were paying up front, and now they have to deliver on their promises.
All right. Senator Rounds, thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely.
Great to have you with us.
Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, lots of new questions about the so-called dirty dossier. Who knew what and when, and where did the information come from?
We think there's some major irregularities at the State Department.
Congressman Chris Stewart of the House Intelligence Committee joins us next with details. And the online mob catches up with Shania Twain and other celebs. Chris Steiwalt next on why the trend seems to be accelerating. A flood of new questions about the so-called dirty dossier in the wake of House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes claiming there was no original intelligence used to launch the investigation into the Trump campaign. Kristen Fisher is here following the new developments for us tonight. Kristen.
Hey, Shannon, well, let's start with these claims by Republican Congressman Devin Nunes. He says that he's been trying to get his hands on the electronic communication from the FBI and the Justice Department that started the entire Russia investigation. But when he finally got a look at it, he claims there was nothing there, that there was no official intelligence used to launch the investigation. Listen here.
The counterintelligence investigation uses the tools of our intelligence services that are not supposed to be used on American citizens. So we've long wanted to know, well, what intelligence did you have that actually led to this investigation? So what we found now, after the investigators have reviewed it, is that, in fact, there was no intelligence.
Now, the central figure in that electronic communication is the former Trump campaign aide George Papadopoulos, who's already pled guilty to making false statements about his contacts with Russians. Well, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff is now using that guilty plea to make his case that the intelligence regarding Papadopoulos has, quote, proven to be well-founded. He's also accusing Congressman Nunes of being disingenuous and destructive to our institutions. Quote, the majority, or Republicans, seem to believe that if it can discredit the initiation of the investigation by attacking the FBI, Justice Department, and State Department, it can get the public to ignore the growing body of evidence of illicit contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Well, today, a reporter brought it up in the White House briefing, and the press secretary echoed what Nunes has been saying, that she believes there was no reason to launch the Russia probe.
That this was a false premise that this entire thing started on. We continue to repeat that we think that the idea that the Trump campaign was involved in any collusion with Russia is a total witch hunt. Our position on that has been very clear since the beginning of this process, and the president's echoing exactly what that position is.
Now, we all learned that the Papadopoulos information, not that controversial dossier, is what kickstarted the Russia probe, and we learned it from the now notorious Nunes memo. But the legal fallout from that publication of that dossier is still making its way through the courts. On Friday, 3 Russian oligarchs filed a fresh lawsuit against the dossier's author, the former British spy Christopher Steele. And today we learned in another lawsuit that a federal judge has asked the Dutch government for help in getting 2 Dutch bankers to testify under oath. So, Shannon, there are a lot of moving parts here involving players literally from all over the world.
Absolutely. And again, more questions than answers as these developments come. Kristen, thank you very much.
Thanks, Shannon.
Good to see you. All right, let's bring in constitutional attorney Robert Barnes and Utah Republican Congressman Chris Stewart, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you tonight.
Good evening.
All right, Congressman, I'll start with you. You heard the back and forth there, obviously, from the chairman, Nunes, saying we come to find out there is no original intelligence that led to this kicking off. And obviously the ranking member there, Congressman Adam Schiff, saying the Republicans will do anything to discredit our agencies and try to distract from the ongoing investigation.
Oh, it's just silliness what Mr. Schiff said. He said there's a growing body of evidence. I would ask, what world is he living on? The foundation of this has been dissolving for 8 or 10 months now. And here's the thing. For more than a year, we've heard collusion, and then there's virtually no evidence of that. And so it's a fair question to go back to the FBI and DOJ. Well, if there's no evidence of collusion, on what basis did you begin this investigation? What evidence did you have that did cause you concern? We've been trying to find that out for months and months. They stonewalled us. They, again, by the way, on another subject again. And now finally they provide it for us, and we learned what we suspected from the beginning. They had no official American intelligence that led them to believe there was anything here to investigate. That's a meaningful thing for the American people to know, and I don't know why Mr. Schiff would defend that type of behavior.
Well, and somebody who might have more information about all of this is the former deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. There's now a criminal referral based on what the inspector general found with regard to his statements, and there's now a lot of back and forth, Robert, between him and the former FBI director about who is telling the truth, because they're telling 2 different versions of this story. In the meantime, University of Chicago professor Charles Lipson says this: even a prosecutor fresh out of law school ought to be able to flip McCabe, who is facing serious jail time and thinks he's been betrayed. Such men are dangerous. If there was a high-level conspiracy to obstruct justice in the Clinton investigation, or to use the so-called deep state to smear Trump, McCabe would know a lot about it. Robert, what do you think?
Oh, precisely. There's no question about it. What you have with Andrew McCabe is someone who violated 18 U.S.C. 1001, made multiple false statements in the course of the investigation of the OIG. And he made apparently additionally false statements about who was responsible. Where there was real probable cause for a real criminal investigation was as to the Clinton Foundation. Yet somehow that investigation gets covered up and hushed up. McCabe blames the DOJ. Other people blame McCabe. McCabe says that Comey authorized leaks. Comey said he didn't authorize leaks. What it looks like is an expansive criminal conspiracy of high-ranking people within the Obama Department of Justice to cover up for the Clintons and to bring a investigation against President Trump where there was no probable cause. There was no factual foundation, as we discovered again today from Congressman Nunes, for there to have ever been any investigation into the president. So we have cover-ups, we have illicit criminal conduct by the 2 prior directors of the FBI, and that requires a meaningful and thorough investigation as to what really transpired.
Well, and Congressman, do you think that as this plays out, there's any way for this to be viewed in a nonpartisan way? Because people seem to have drawn their battle lines, and it seems to be, you know, either you support Nunes or you support Schiff. Where do you go from here?
Well, at the end of the day, the truth comes out. And at the end of the day, you can't ignore the truth. And you can continue, as Mr. Schiff has done, to say a growing body of evidence. But the American people aren't stupid. They can look at that and say, well, where is this evidence? If you're claiming this, eventually you've got to show them. And another, I think, important observation, and you allude to it in your question, and that is one of the most discouraging things about this episode is Department of Justice and FBI have no business becoming political animals. And when they do, this is what we're going to see. We see them attack each other now. They're calling each other liars. They're defending themselves. If they didn't get involved in a political process and intervene where they shouldn't have, they wouldn't be in this situation.
Well, and to that point, Robert, do you think quickly the Inspector General is now possibly looking into whether James Comey violated any handling of classified information with his memos, which we've now seen partially redacted, but where do you think we go from here?
There is definitely probable cause that James Comey committed criminal espionage. Under Section 793 of Title 18, it doesn't require the information to be classified. It just requires that government proprietary information that was entrusted to James Comey that just related to national security was either removed or disclosed to an unauthorized person. That is clearly the case because when James Comey classified those memos, he admitted and stipulated that those memos included national security information. So even a subsequent declassification would not remove him from criminal exposure under the Espionage Act. So I anticipate the Office of the Inspector General will, in fact, refer James Comey for charges for criminal espionage.
Well, if both he and McCabe are facing those referrals, there could be a lot of discussion amongst the two about who goes next in working with authorities potentially to get to some kind of resolution in both of those cases. Congressman, we're out of time unless you have something to add quickly.
Yeah, just very quickly. I just think it's ironic that the thing that the Director Comey was investigating Hillary Clinton on and he exonerated her is the very thing that he later did himself. And how could he wonder that he would find himself in hot trouble for that?
Yeah, and a lot of people think his changing the standard of how that was applied may actually wind up benefiting him. So, Congressman Stewart, Robert Barnes, great to have you both tonight. Thank you both.
Thank you both.
Glad to be.
All right, mob mentality working to silence viewpoints they don't agree with. Just ask Shania Twain, forced to apologize for saying she might have voted for President Trump. Meanwhile, a football player under fire for holding a gun in his daughter's prom photo. And a conservative columnist fired for being, well, conservative. Well, Trace Gallagher and Chris Steyerwalt examine mob politics coming up next. The internet is fast becoming a vehicle for mob justice, for better or worse. Trace Gallagher is about to show us. Hey, Trace.
Hi, Shannon. Shania Twain's new tour begins next week, and to kick it off, the Canadian-born country star was profiled in the Sunday Guardian, where she said that if she'd been eligible to vote in 2016, she would have voted for Trump because even though she found him offensive, he seemed honest. Quoting, "I just don't want bull blank. I would have voted for a feeling that it was transparent, and politics has a reputation of not being that, right?" Well, the quote went viral. She trended on Twitter, and the hashtag Shania Twain canceled had hundreds of tweets with comments like, "We are ashamed of you. You don't deserve to be Canadian, and you are a flop." And this quote, "Thought she had died." Nope, just her career. And when the mob spoke, Shania Twain apologized, quoting, "My answer was awkward, but certainly should not be taken as representative of my values, nor does it mean I endorse him." Though experts warn that before she allows the left to bully her into submission, she needs to remember that many of her fans support Donald Trump. Meantime, conservative writer Kevin Williamson says the Twitter mob cost him his job at The Atlantic. When Williamson, who worked for years at the National Review, was hired at The Atlantic, critics scoured his writing archive and found an old Twitter exchange where he wrote, quoting, "The law should treat abortion like any other homicide." And when he was pushed to clarify, he added, quote, "I have hanging more in mind." The liberal Twitter mob then suggested in mass that The Atlantic made a mistake in hiring Williamson, and The Atlantic agreed, firing him after just 2 weeks. Williamson writes that whatever your stance on abortion, at least his opinion is interesting, saying, quote, "The editors of The Atlantic thought so too until the mob started doing their thinking for them." And finally, Candace Owens, an African-American woman and conservative activist, is gaining prominence for spreading conservative values on college campuses. When Black Lives Matters protested a speech she gave at UCLA, she called them, quote, "a bunch of whiny toddlers pretending to be oppressed for attention." Rapper Kanye West, who supported Trump in 2016, tweeted, quote, "I love the way Candace Owens thinks." Here's Candace Owens on Hannity. Watch.
Kanye West is just the first person that's brave enough to come out swinging against them and saying that he has a right to think according to how he would like to.
Candace West is getting big-time pushback from the mob. Kanye West is getting big-time pushback from the mob, rather, but so far he is standing firm. Shannon.
He's probably got a few billions in the bank to help him back up whatever he feels like saying. Trace, thank you very much.
Sure.
Our next guest has plenty to say about the rise of the internet mob. Fox News politics editor and author of the Halftime Report, Chris Steyerwalt, joins us now. How are you?
Madam, happy Monday.
Listen, you wrote a great piece people should read last week if they missed it. I believe it was the 19th. And you said one thing, you said Twitter's good for two things, jokes and ruining people's lives. So yeah, I mean, it's an easy way for people to immediately express their outrage over anything that upsets them.
Well, and there is this pack mentality that forms, a mob mentality that forms. You can see what happened with Starbucks over what was very obviously a regrettable incident that took place in one of their stores in Philadelphia, which had all the hallmarks of a racist action. And inside the unit was this obvious problem. But when it became a war, right, and Twitter went to war and social media went to war, it's very gratifying for people. You click a like, you click a heart, you click a box, and you say, I'm an activist for a tenth of a second, and then you move on with your life. Meantime, the blob keeps rolling through the online space, picking up new clicks, new likes, these low barrier to entry participants in the mob, and it continues to roll forward until it gets its pound of flesh, until it feels like it gets justice and somebody gets fired or something happens.
Yeah, you wrote this. You said, we are developing a system in which unaccountable, unelected individuals who bear little to no consequence for their participation or leadership have become the arbiters of justice.
And I think we have to remember here that part of the problem is that government is failing, that as our government ceases to fulfill the functions as an intermediary, we live in a culture where it's corporate entities and then interconnected individuals. And the mob is functional in this sense, which is when companies get out of hand or do things that are wrong, if you get enough people together, you can force a change because they'll say, oh, we have to be worried about what's going to happen to ourselves or to our bottom line. But we should remember that without the influence of these mediating entities, a functional government, strong community institutions, whether they be churches or synagogues or mosques or whatever, but strong communities and healthy governments prevent mob rule. We are now left in many cases and hoping sometimes that the mob will bring justice, even if it's quite rough.
Well, and you say sometimes people act having an opinion before they have facts, and that's another big part of this conversation. Now, Scott Adams, who is the creator behind Dilbert, commentary, he does a lot of, we've had him on the show, you know, he does a lot of commentary online where he breaks down some of these issues. This thing about Kanye West and Candace Owens, he says 7 words and he ripped a hole in reality, where he said that he liked the way that she talked. He said, because Kanye is supposed to be over here and Candace is supposed to be over here. People couldn't deal.
You know, tribalism makes people stupid. And it makes people make stupid choices. If you like Kanye West music, or you like his sneakers, or whatever it is about Kanye West that you like, it shouldn't matter what his politics are. But watching today, it was great. Republicans who previously probably never, and I will tell you right now, College Dropout is probably one of the 10 best, is in probably the 10 best albums of the last 20 years. A truly amazing album. Kanye West, a talented musician. I bet there are Republicans or Trump supporters who had never heard a Kanye West album who today said, I'm going to go, he's the best, we love Kanye West. Similarly, there were probably Democrats who had never listened to Shania Twain who said, we hate her no matter what. So part of what happens in this mob mentality is that people choose sides arbitrarily and then become moral imbeciles. They surrender their own judgment and their ability to reason because they say, well, where is my mob running? Which mean streets is my mob running down? So if that means today I like Dilbert and Kanye West, then I'll go do that. And if tomorrow it means I like Shania Twain and Garfield, then I'll go do that.
Garfield. I've got Shania and Kanye on my running list. They're very motivational.
And you have excellent taste in music.
Yes, I do.
That's true.
And guest. It's good to see you tonight, Chris.
Quite so.
All right, coming up. The case of baby Alfie. We've been following this. You know, we've got new developments tonight as protesters try to storm his hospital. Italy has agreed to step in and help. The Pope has voiced support, but his family facing all kinds of pushback from British authorities. Governor Mike Huckabee joins us live. He'll tell us why, even though this case is overseas, you should be worried about if it could happen here. That story is next. A dramatic confrontation in England tonight as the family and activists supporting baby Alfie Evans attempted to rush to his hospital room facing off against police. The terminally ill toddler was taken off life-sustaining measures like his ventilator today in Britain, but Alfie Evans is still fighting. The family has lost a series of legal battles to preserve his life. His father says he believes it amounts to state-sanctioned murder. Now, Italy has granted Alfie citizenship after the family begged the Pope for his help. Joining me now, former Governor Mike Huckabee is also a Fox News contributor. Governor, the last I checked, the family said 9:17 tonight, their local time. He'd been taken off the ventilator. He was still breathing, but they don't believe getting enough oxygen. They've asked the hospital for help, but it is over now. The hospital says there will be no help sustaining this little boy, and they also won't let him go to another country or hospital who says we're willing to take a chance on him. What do you make of this?
Well, the real tragedy is that this is what happens when the government gets in complete control of the healthcare system. And I know people are going to say, oh, that's not what it's about. Well, it really is, because if you're in Great Britain and you have a cold, you just need to see the doctor, it works fine. If you have something serious, then the government's going to make decisions based on how much it's going to cost. In this case, this is a 23-month-old baby who is at Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool, and the government has decided he's not worth saving. I hate even to let those words come out of my mouth. There's no such thing as a disposable human being, as an expendable, worthless human being. But that's the decision that the British government has made. The Italian government has declared this young boy to be a citizen. They're willing to take him in, and the British government says, no, we're not going to let him leave. We're going to go ahead and kill him. I just find this chilling.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe hard for Americans to understand this. I think here the hospital system is obviously different, but I think too parents feel a lot more aggressively invested in individual rights and having a say about their children. And yet this is just a repeated case that we're seeing over in the UK when it comes to these dire medical situations, young children. And these are parents without great means. These are youngsters themselves, early 20s. And they say, you know, basically we have no voice. We saw this with Charlie Gard last year as well.
Well, you're right. They're both in their 20s, but they want to save their son. And they're willing to take him to Italy, and Italy is willing to take him. There's all kinds of offers to give him a med flight there. What I don't understand, and I think it's hard for the British government to justify, why don't they let these parents at least have a shot at saving their son? Why not? What's to lose? They have nothing to lose. It'll get the boy out of Britain, put him in Italy. If he doesn't make it, well, at least they've done everything they can do. But I just think most of us as human beings in a civilized world just don't want to start evaluating and saying that some people just aren't worth the effort to try to save when they're 23 months old. Yeah. I just don't want to think that we're there yet.
Here's what the hospital says. They
sad.
say Alfie's parents have done everything in their power to do what they think is best for him, even though that is contrary to the view of the doctors. That has inevitably prolonged the period over which he's been given treatment that was determined in February not to be in his best interest. We understand that this decision is very distressing for Alfie's family at this very difficult time. Just quickly, we're just about out of time, Governor, but I know at one point an attorney advised Alfie's father that he had the right to take him out of the hospital. He tried to, and the police stopped him. What can we do now?
Ultimately, there's one question. Who's God here? Is God really in charge, or is the British government deciding that it's God and it's going to make the decision life or death? That's what it comes down to.
Governor, always good to see you. Thank you for weighing in on this difficult case. We'll continue to monitor it as we know it is very dire for this young boy at this point. Thank you, sir. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, actor Sylvester Stallone calls on President Trump to pardon a sports hero for more than a century ago. And amid tragedy, a story of heroism. One man stepped up to stop a killer in that Nashville Waffle House, how he risked his life to save others. That's next.